Hello, friends. Before we get this episode underway, Eric and I would like to express our condolences to Brian James Schnedler, who passed away. By the time you guys hear this podcast, it'll probably be a couple of weeks or so since, but he passed away, and you may remember him from an excellent interview that we had, a conversation talking about his wonderful synth project known as Endless Reach. He was also a member of several other projects throughout the community and was a real stand-up guy. So rest in peace, Brian James Schnedler. It was really cool chatting with you and hanging out with you on your very short time on this earth. What we're actually going to do, I just want to introduce the podcast. Welcome to Accelerativ Thrust. My name is Dan.
And I'm Erik.
And so speaking of being clever, what follows is a suggestion that I had that was totally not clever. And that is to celebrate our 81st episode. What do you guys think of that one?
Yeah.
Of all the
classic
things,
milestone.
Of all of the reasons that you can think of why you are going to quit listening, this probably will take the cake, won't it? So
probably.
Yeah. 80th episode, Andrew Stewart Klein, last episode. Fantastic conversation. First interview in a long time. I was born in 1980. And then I thought, why not celebrate that? And I'll tell you why not celebrate that, because celebrating 81 sounds better for some reason.
Well, it's one louder, isn't it?
Mainly because I forgot to mention anything about me born in 1980 in the last episode. So this is all making sense, right, Erik? Why this is leading to this.
Yeah. Yeah,
also,
it is. Yeah, it is.
Also, I decided to, I made a suggestion to Erik to review double albums, because I listened to a double album and I thought this would be a great excuse for me to suggest we listen to double albums. And so we have two double albums that we're reviewing today that we made each other listen to. And then we also have a really fantastic, and we'll get into that more, just a local talent overall. That's all I'll say to that. But you know what? Before we get to all of that, I thought we could play a game. And Erik agreed to play my game. And that game is something that I can't name yet.
Oh my God.
Because it doesn't have a name. But
wow,
what
this
I am
is like going inside
the
mind of Jigsaw right now.
It is, yeah. My mind is all over the place all the time. I'm going to call this Dan's excuse. Dan's excuse. Let's just call it that. Dan's excuse. We'll just leave it at that. So I found this list of the 10 best albums of 1981. And I just thought it'd be kind of cool and fun. Maybe not cool, but fun.
And maybe not even fun.
Maybe not even fun. Who knows? We're going to see where this goes. For me and Erik, just to kind of go through these 10 albums that Slant Magazine or slantmagazine.com went over on March 2nd, 2020, it says. So this is the 10 best albums of 1981. Before we get started, I'll list off some of the honorable mentions. Black Flag's Damaged. I didn't know that came out in 81.
Wow. That is an honorable mention.
That's yeah. That's a really good point.
Why is that really important record?
Why is that not on here?
I mean, I'm not saying it's good.
That's almost
no, it is good.
That's almost a discredit. But you know what, though? It is actually, I don't think, nearly as good as a lot of people give it credit. But that's a whole other thing. My favorite we've talked about this. I think both of our favorites, Black Flag releases the first 4 years.
Which I'm sure is very frustrating to some listeners.
I'm sure it is. And also, I like
whatever.
My War a lot better than Damaged.
Yeah. I like Damaged a lot. I mean, it is what it is. I mean, it totally influenced everything that came after it. It's important.
Sure did.
Sure
did. No, you can't deny that. That's for sure. If not for TV Party alone, which I still think is a killer track. I really love TV Party. I love that song. It's just so absurd.
Yeah. I love in Repo Man when Emilio Estevez is like kind of Charlie Brown kicking a can down the street sort of moment. And he's just kind of singing that to himself. It's really cool.
I'm going to have to revisit Repo Man sometime. I know I saw it, but when I was really young, and I have not really revisited it. And I feel like it's one of those things that I need to revisit for sure.
Yeah, it's too good.
Cool. I'll have to check it out. The Police, Ghost in the Machine. Yeah, that's got some good stuff on it. Yeah, and then I don't know. There's a Stevie Nicks record.
Which one?
Belladonna.
Yeah, that's a good record.
Elvis Costello and the Attractions Trust.
Yeah, that's pretty good. These are mini reviews from Erik, by the way.
Many reviews, yes. Anyway, so those are some of the honorable mentions.
Yeah.
All right, so do you want to start at number?
Let's start at 10.
Let's start at 10. Okay, so I have absolutely, I'll just let you know whether or not, like I figure we could just let the listeners know if we're familiar with the record that is mentioned. So, number 10, speaking of sex, murder, drugs, and bad vibes, that's the first thing that says it was the tagline of this record, which I think is automatically cool. Number 10, the Gun Club, Fire of Love. Nope, not familiar, but I've heard a lot about the Gun Club. How about you, Erik?
Yeah, I like this record a lot. I don't know how to describe it. It sort of brought something into contemporary underground rock music that was sort of missing, sort of like this real heavy blues, kind of inspired, just by regular blues, Screamin' Jay Hawkins, things like that. Howlin' Wolf, real wild kind of blues. No one else was really doing that. Not that was putting out records anyway. And so I think, directly spawned all that stuff. John Spencer, White Stripes, not to mention all the other bands throughout the 80s, stuff like that. And also Kid Congo Powers is the guitar player. And Kid Congo Powers rules. And he was also in the Bad Seeds.
Sure.
But yeah, I think it's a great record. Super, super cool and not like anything else at the time.
Cool. That's on my checklist.
Nice.
Kid Creole and the Coconuts, Fresh Fruit in Foreign Places. Not familiar, but this sounds really interesting.
Yeah.
What about you, Erik?
No, I don't. I've heard the name, but I don't know it.
I like the description here. A perfect distillation of his polyglot blend of mutant disco, musical theater, and big band.
Whoa. So yeah, that sounds kind of nuts.
That does sound nuts. Number 8, Gang of Four, Solid Gold. Yes, I enjoy Gang of Four. I'm not as familiar with them as I feel I should be, but I have listened to Solid Gold, and this is a really cool record. How about you, Erik?
Never listened to it. Nope. I don't know Gang of Four. I always thought they were sort of like a angular punk sort of deal, but never really gave them a chance. Probably
that's exactly what they are. You actually just nailed I would say they have definitely a dance, like a mechanical dancey feel to them too.
Cool.
I think they probably heavily inspired like bands like the Liars in their early days.
Cool.
Because before Liars really went kind of like, there was like that dance punk sort of thing. And Liars were kind of part of that with their first album before like, what's the one record? They Were Wrong, So We Drowned, or whatever it was called.
Yeah.
Before they really went kind of experimental and kind of just lost their minds, which I mean, their first record, which I can't think of the title, was pretty dance punky, or just like stuff like Block Party or even like Friends Ferdinand, I'm sure were heavily influenced by Gang of Four.
Huh,
Um,
nice. Yeah.
yeah, I think it's probably fair to say they're probably at least, if not so, at least close to the inventors of that sound.
Wow.
I
Awesome.
would say. Next is Prince Controversy. Now, I've listened to a lot of Prince records. I
Mhm.
actually am not familiar that much with this one.
No, me neither. I know the track Controversy. It's really cool. It kind of reminds me of that song White Horse, if you remember that
Mhm.
song.
Yes, I
Like
do.
the production part of it, real sort of minimal and electronic and funky. But the rest of the record, I have no idea. There's a song called Jack You Off, which I don't know. That's cool. Ronnie
Yes.
Talk to Russia. That sounds cool. That sounds cool. I should give it a shot.
Definitely. And the thing with Prince, and I love Prince, and he was pretty diverse, but a lot of times you kind of know what you're getting with a Prince record, I think. But then again, he does surprise quite often too. So he did a lot of different things. But what I mean is, you kind of know what you're getting with Prince. Is you can always tell that it's Prince, you know.
For sure.
So really cool. Next up is one that I've actually been meaning to check out, and that's the number 6 Tom Tom Club self-titled record,
Yeah.
which has 2 members of the Talking Heads, from what I understand.
Yeah, at least 2. That's my
Mhm.
understanding. Yeah.
I've been meaning to check this out. This kind of sounds like it would be up your alley. Have you
It
checked
is.
it out, Eric?
I love it. Actually, beyond love it. I think it's amazing. And the song Genius of Love is in my top 5 favorite songs of all time. And that is not me being hyperbolic. It is one of the best songs I've ever heard. It's so fun. And listeners, if they don't know the song, I mean, the second you start it, you'll be like, oh, okay. But
Sure.
Mariah Carey sampled it, and I can't remember which one. Let me just look real quick. Fantasy.
Yep. I believe that Old Dirty Bastard was on the remix.
Cool.
It had a verse on the remix.
Yeah. So yeah, it's a great record. And if you like Talking Heads from that era, I don't know why you wouldn't like it. It gets way goofier. And they sort of let themselves get goofier, which is really cool, because even though Talking Heads somewhat sound wise can get a little goofy, as far as the presentation, subject matter, and things like that, I think it's delivered very earnestly. I don't think it doesn't seem like they're having much fun with the subject matter.
Sure.
So this is sort of like being able to hear those crazy musical ideas with a little bit of fun too.
That gives me more incentive to check it out. That makes me even more stoked to hear that, Eric. So that's another check mark for me.
Nice.
Okay, so the next one, I'm familiar with this band, and I struggle. You might remember this, Eric, but they kind of had a couple of hits on the radio. The Human
Big
League,
time.
Dare.
Yeah.
And what were the hits that they had? I'm trying to remember.
Don't You Want Me?
Yeah, I mean, you can basically go into any grocery store and it'll be playing,
Right.
at some point.
I think that the single Fascination came out around this time as well, but I don't think it appears on the actual album. But that's another amazing Human League song.
I'm sure that I probably heard that, but it's just a memory block right now. Now this next one, this is another one that I'm pretty sure, and let me know if I'm wrong, Eric, but I'm about 99% sure you've probably heard this one. Brian Eno and David Byrne, My Life in the Bush of Ghosts. And I've got to make a confession. I have not gone down the Brian Eno rabbit hole yet. That's another check mark. How about you, Eric?
I love My Life in the Bush of Ghosts. I would say that record, I remember getting it on cassette from either Musicland or Jack's after cassettes were sort of outdated. And I was blown away by it. It was my introduction to sort of global music, my introduction to electronic avant-garde music. And I had no idea. I mean, I technically knew who David Byrne was from like watching the Talking Heads videos or whatever, but I didn't know his name was David Byrne. So I didn't know who Brian Eno or David Byrne were. And so this record just came across as like something I never even thought about it existing. Like the rhythms and how things are put together and the construction of it, I had never heard anything like it. And I think I probably heard it pretty early, 1988, maybe, is what I'm thinking. And so I didn't even have the vocabulary or experience to understand what I was hearing. I just knew it was really cool. And yeah, I don't know. Like I said, it was a very formative sort of release for me.
Wow, that's really cool that you heard it that early too.
Yeah. Yeah, the cheap tape bin, the sale tape bins, that was where I got a lot of introduction to things that otherwise I wouldn't have heard, you know.
Was that
Like,
at Music Land?
Yeah, Musicland or Jack's, both, or Walmart.
Sure.
And like seriously, like $2 if it has a cool cover, like why not try it? Who cares? You know, you get some crappy ones like Phantom Rocker and Slick, which is the band that the other Stray Cat started. Like you know, you get crappy tapes too.
That is great.
But
like
sometimes you get really good ones too. So
I found a copy of Sleep Jerusalem at
wow.
The Muscatine Music Land for like $1.99.
Yeah. Wow. That's
That was,
amazing.
Pretty crazy. That was my introduction to stoner rock. I wasn't ready yet. But I'm not saying Sleep Jerusalem was not a great record. It's a great record to me now. But at the time, I think I just wanted to hear Korn or something, you know, when it came to heavy music. So number 3, I know for a fact, you know, this one, we've talked about this group on this podcast, New Order Movement. I still regrettably have not gone down the rabbit hole of New Order. I really need to get my butt in line.
Yeah.
What do you think of this one, Eric?
Great. You know, it's hard to know some of the releases, like if they were released here or in the UK and what they have on them and stuff. But the release of this that I heard had Ceremony and Temptation on it, which are probably, I don't know, arguably the most influential synth pop songs ever, you know? And so, yeah, I think it's super important. Yeah. And I love New Order. I love Joy Division. Yeah, I don't have much else to say about that. I guess just great stuff.
Cool. This next one I have heard. Number 2, Grace Jones Nightclubbing. It's been a while since I listened to it. I checked it out from the Muscatine Library when I was still listening to CDs, and I enjoyed it. I'm gonna revisit it, but yeah, I really like this. What have you heard this before, Eric?
No, I haven't listened to any Grace Jones, to be honest, so I should probably give it a shot.
I regrettably have to say that I can't really speak on it too much. I remember that I enjoyed it. I can't make an honest assessment of it until I revisit it again. But I will say I really liked it when I listened to it. It was probably about 10 years ago or so. And I really only listened to it like once. So that's it's one of those things. You know what I mean? It's kind of like Repo Man. It's like I just have to revisit it, but I know that I liked it.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Number 1. Now, this is somewhat interesting to me as a number 1 choice. Top 10 best albums of 1981. Kraftwerk, Computer World. Yeah, I've listened to this. I've listened to at least 3 or 4 Kraftwerk albums. This, I've definitely listened to Man Machine.
Yeah.
What is it? Trans Euro Express.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is really cool. I've always enjoyed Kraftwerk. My introduction to Kraftwerk was Big Black.
Sure.
The album Songs About Fucking, their cover of The Model, which I did not know for the longest time was a Kraftwerk song.
Yeah.
And it was funny because a band that I was in high school covered The Model, and we thought we were covering a Big Black song.
Nice.
We didn't realize we were covering a cover of a Kraftwerk song covered by Big Black.
It's a lot of covers.
I'll be the judge of when we get too meta. Holy shit!
So
speaking of covers,
it's a lot of covers.
Do you have the single for that, Big Black, The Model?
No, but I've seen it.
Oh
and
my
it's
God.
fantastic.
It is so
that
good.
the one That's the one
Yes.
where they kind of do a tribute to
Yeah,
Kraftwerk, right?
one side of it is for the model, and so they're
Mhm.
dressed like Kraftwerk. The other
Mhm.
side is He's a Whore by
Oh,
Cheap
Cheap
Trick,
Trick, yes.
and they
yeah,
look
yeah.
just like Cheap. It's so good.
It is great. Yes.
It's a
yes.
wonderful cover art, especially for a single. Like I can't imagine how much work went into that.
And it just goes to show the oddities of Steve Albini's taste
Yeah,
in the
for
80s,
sure.
you know?
Yeah, but yeah, Computer
but yeah.
World. Computer World. I can't even start to talk about it. It is my favorite Kraftwerk album, which is saying a lot because I love Kraftwerk. I find the Man Machine to be a little poppy, like song oriented, if that makes sense.
Right.
And Radioactivity,
Yep.
I really like a lot. Trans Europe Express is really great. I mean, just that influence on what became the Africa Mambata song, Planet
Mhm.
Rock, all that is amazing. But Computer World is outrageous. It is unashamedly electronic, every second of it. I mean, there may be a human voice here and there, but usually it's a vocoder, usually it's some kind of machine talking, but it somehow ends up being really organic and beautiful. And
Yes.
and there's some moments in it that transcend all of it. I'm thinking specifically about halfway through Computer World 2, the track Computer World 2. It just goes into this part. It's like very meditative for me. But also what makes Computer World really cool to me is like how prophetic the whole thing is. Like they're talking about how it's going to be the future of banking and business
Mhm.
and everything. There's even the song Computer Love, which is amazing. Talks
Yeah.
about meeting other single people on the computer
Yep.
and setting up
Yes.
dates. Like all this stuff in 1981, pretty
Yep.
outrageous. And like I said, it's just a really pretty album, even though it's so stark. I will admit that Pocket Calculator is a little goofy. I mean,
Mhm.
if you don't suspend your disbelief, sort of, a song about a pocket calculator is very stupid. But,
right.
but the intro to Numbers, which I think was sampled by Missy Elliott,
Mhm.
funky as hell, it automatically kind of washes away the flavor of Pocket Calculator. But anyway, I could go on about Computer World for the rest of my life. So
That's another.
I think
another thing.
they're right. I think that's the best album of 1981 because it might be the best album of the 80s. I don't know.
Sure. That's it's interesting because that's another thing about Kraftwerk is how important they were actually to the development of hip hop as a genre. You mentioned
For sure. Yeah.
Missy Elliott. I mean,
Mhm.
all of the old school guys, everyone from LL Cool J to Run DMC to Africa, especially Africa Bambaataa,
Oh, for sure.
KRS-One, Chuck D, they'll all talk about the importance of Kraftwerk.
Yeah.
All the old DJs and everything. And of course, that has to do a lot with Planet Rock. But it's, yeah, that's the thing is Kraftwerk. I think you hit it on the head there, Eric. It's got a very cold sort of, I guess, robotic feel to it, like you said. Like it doesn't sound like there's a human voice, yet it feels oddly human.
Yeah.
I am surprised by the absence of Black Flags Damaged.
Yeah.
And it being a honorable mention, at least there's that. Yeah, and I honestly I don't know enough about records that were released in 81 that I couldn't think of a better list probably. I mean,
No, I don't know. Yeah.
Iron Maiden's Killers came out, but I mean Killers, while it's a great record and one of my personal favorites by Iron Maiden, I can't say that it really changed anything, you know?
Yeah. Well, that makes me wonder too, like if Slant, I don't know much about Slant, but maybe they have a slant towards punk rock and new wave.
Sure.
Because all of this stuff on this best of list I mean, most of it is electronic. All of it
Yep.
is underground, and almost all of it could be considered new wave. And so I bet if we looked at a full list of the records of 1981, we'd be like, "What the fuck? Why wasn't that on there?" You know?
Right. Yeah.
But this is a fine list, and I agree
Sure.
with a lot
Yeah.
of it.
If nothing else, it's celebrating the fact that we're on our 81st episode.
Yeah, and they knew that in 2020
Mhm.
that they should put this list out so we could use it.
Speaking of
celebrate.
prophecy, I predict
Yeah.
that we're going to review double albums.
Whew. Yeah. Wow.
Let's see if that prediction comes true.
Okay.
Come on, everybody, it's record time.
Holy hell.
Yeah.
Holy shit.
Yeah.
Do I have a big one for you guys?
Mhm.
So, and that's because it's a double album.
Yeah.
So my pick for the double album, which gave birth to this idea, this absurd idea that we're going to be celebrating our 81st episode and we're going to be reviewing double albums. First of all, my confession is that I suggested to Erik that we review double albums because it was an excuse for me to send him this record. Because for some reason, when I listened to it, I'm like, for some reason, Erik Whitaker needs to hear this record. And you may agree or disagree. We'll see, Erik. So Today Is the Day is the brainchild of Steve Austin. Originally from Nashville. I'm not sure if that's where Steve is still located. But Today Is the Day is basically a solo project where he rotates different members and has different lineups. He's still putting out records. Today Is the Day is still putting out records. I'm not sure if that means that he plays all of the instruments on the recordings. I would suspect not, because at one time, Mastodon drummer Brand Daler was actually in the lineup, like I think in the early 2000s or maybe the late 90s or something. And I couldn't imagine Steve Austin being nearly as good as that guy on drums, but I mean, who knows? Maybe he is. So Today Is the Day kind of, they're an interesting group. I remember I had some friends that were really, really into this band. And for the longest time, I couldn't quite get into them. I don't know what it was, but something about them was just hard for me to grasp onto until I sat down and listened. I just actually sat down and listened to a record one day. And I thought, this is pretty awesome. And then I kind of gradually kept becoming a fan over time. And now I got to say that I love Today Is the Day. Their early releases were put out on Amphetamine Reptile Records. So the same label as like some of the more off the wall Melvins releases and Unsane and stuff like that. So there's definitely a big noise rock element with these guys. This was their sixth album, and it came out in 2002. One of the things that I remember about this record is that a lot of people who were fans of Today Is the Day absolutely hated it. And I don't understand why. I guess I kind of understand why. If you were a big fan of what Today Is the Day was doing before this record came out, let's just say that this record is really, really dark. Like, I mean, it's really dark to the point where it sounds just absolutely bonkers at times. Not in the sense of like the music isn't like really all over the place, but I mean, it really sounds just really, really dark and brooding, and the production is sometimes almost reminiscent of like really old school necro black metal. So it's got a really like sort of washy guitar sound. The drums are kind of boxy and really raw sounding, but in the best possible ways, I think. And there's elements of, like I said, there's elements of black metal, particularly mostly in the vocals sometimes. A lot of noise rock, a lot of sludgy sort of elements of thrash, and just, pretty much any sort of heavy, heavy style of music you can think of. And it's really, really challenging to listen to at times, which I think is by design. I think there's actually parts of this record where I almost feel like Steve Austin purposely made it to kind of get under the skin of the listeners. And I could be completely off about that, but that's kind of and I don't think it's to be obnoxious. I just think that this is the kind of stuff that Steve Austin is into, the kind of production. There's a lot of samples that really adds almost like a horror movie element to it, or it's a lot of the samples seem to be from like murder mystery type stuff. So like, I don't know, documentaries like Dateline or something about murders or confessions of people. Maybe they're samples from movies. Erik, you might be able to recognize some of the samples that were going on there, but there's definitely a horror movie element to it. I kind of feel. But with that all being said, one of the things that I really like about this record is that there's also moments of pure beauty in it as well. There's some pianos, some acoustic guitars, where you can almost hear an influence of like classical guitar. You can definitely hear a jazz influence, particularly I would say at times jazz fusion type stuff. Definitely there's some ambience going on. And maybe that's the reason why people had a hard time digging this album initially at first, is because I think there were a lot of choices musically and production wise that Steve Austin made on this record that maybe delved into a little bit of avant-garde territory, maybe a little too much for the Today Is the Day fans. And there's some kind of white noise that, like, there's kind of a lot of layers on a lot of the songs. Like, you kind of hear some whooshing sounds and stuff like that kind of going on in the background. But there's also a bunch of different weird instruments that are there as well. Like I hear some bells and things like that. Yeah, the guitar tones, the production, I would say is very dense. Yeah, I mean, I'm not quite sure what was going through Steve Austin's mind when he released this, but I really love it. It is definitely it's 2 CDs, and there's a couple of tracks that are come pretty close to 20 minutes long. In fact, I think there's, if I remember correctly, there's one track at least on the second CD that is over 20 minutes long. And sometimes it takes a little while to actually get to the song. Some of these tracks I wouldn't even necessarily classify as songs, more like maybe soundscapes, if you will. It's definitely got a, when you listen to the other material that was put out by this group, it's definitely got a way more experimental sound in the production. And I think Steve produces everything. So I would say that he definitely picked some odd choices for the production, but I think it works really good for what he's trying to convey. And I mean, the way I see it is this is somebody who's really into heavy music that's just trying to challenge the listener a little bit or annoy the listener and in the best way as possible. I love it, but it's an interesting listening experience. And in my opinion, it keeps the listener interested throughout. What did you think, Erik?
Yeah, my review is, this is some wild ass bullshit. No, but it is some wild ass bullshit, but it's good. It is. Okay, first I'll say that the only album I had ever heard by Today Is the Day is Temple of the Morning Star, which came out like, I don't know, 25 years ago. So what I thought they sounded like is really nothing like this release. I mean, there's still elements of droney, heavy, doom, stoner stuff. It's throughout, and that's not to say that Temple of the Morning Star wasn't strange in its own way, but it, for the most part, came off as sort of an experimental metal record. You know, sort of. It wasn't straight by any means or standard. It was weird, but it was kind of at a time where a lot of weird stuff was happening. You know, like Wolves in the Throne Room or whatever. There was a lot of kind of strange metal happening. So this record does have elements of that. It also has some other sort of conventional musical elements, like Dan was saying, like classical or some jazzy moments, things like that. But really, at its core, this is a totally experimental record. This is avant-garde music. It's like cut-up method kind of stuff, or musique concrète, or found sound at times. There are long interludes or pieces. Some of them are super effective at establishing sort of an atmosphere, which, like Dan said, is super dark. Some of them didn't work that well for me. I was sort of like, okay, let's get to the meat of this thing. And we never really did. We just sort of hovered around the outskirts of what could be a main idea in a piece, you know? But yeah, I really enjoyed the samples. I always enjoy samples. I think it just might be because I grew up on industrial music. I grew up in the 90s when people sampled shit all the time for no reason, you know? But yeah, there's a sample of this guy named John Mark Byers. I think you might have even been referencing it about him defending himself about killing his wife or whatever. Okay, so John Mark Byers, actually, this comes from, I think it's part 3 of a documentary series called Paradise Lost. It was about the West Memphis 3.
Okay.
Basically, 3 guys were like accused and convicted of killing 3 small children, 3 boys. Most of the reasoning for their conviction was that they were into heavy metal and into the occult and things like that. So in their small town, obviously, that meant that they were murderers. So John Mark Byers was the main suspect to people that were into Paradise Lost, because he kind of fit the profile. Later, his wife died and everyone thought that he killed her. And then a little later than that, he died in a car crash. So just by using samples like that, it kind of puts you into the mind of the person making this. Like, they want it to be dark. They want you to feel that. And so the choices of samples are also important. The other one that was a standout for me was sort of the pinnacle moment in Rosemary's Baby. It's you know, they all say God is dead, hail Satan, stuff like that. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it works really well. I like that element of it a lot. There's a lot of synths, a lot of electronics. There's white noise. There's like distortion that's so distorted it becomes white noise, like static. It's pretty cool. The vocals are nuts. It's just like this screaming. Yeah, it's like, it reminded me honestly of Yamataka Eye from the Boredoms. Sure. Like that sort of high pitched sort of screaming. A lot of growling, dry lungs, metal vocals throughout. But yeah, if I had to compare it to anything, I don't know, like Khanate, as far as the starkness at moments. I Hate God also for just the brutality of it. Like I said, the Boredoms for the noise, avant-garde aspect of it, and vocally. And it reminded me of early Skinny Puppy too, with the samples and sort of the production of not being afraid to have it be nearly unlistenable at times as far as the noise goes. And actually, if I had to guess, I would say that this was an attempt to represent sort of a deteriorating mental state, kind of like with the Caretaker, Everywhere at the End of Time sort of idea, where this is the sound of a mind deteriorating. And so I think it is effective at that. So if all that sounds like something you'd be into, then I think you should definitely check it out. If all that sounds like really dark, brutal, challenging stuff that you might not be into, I would say that you're probably not going to be into it. I mean, I can't imagine someone saying, yeah, it was okay about this record. Like, that's not an option. So, although I sort of am saying right now that yeah, it was cool, and I'm glad to know that Today Is the Day is weird as shit, because
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Well,
So,
this is
yeah.
from what I've gathered, this is kind of a complete, just sort of left field, like one off, like a curveball in their discography.
Okay, for sure. Yeah.
So yeah.
So I picked sort of a older record because it was hard for me to like really pin down what constitutes a double album. You know what I mean? Like in the 90s and 2000s, there were like double CDs,
Sure.
but a lot of times those were like extra material or
Sure.
outtakes and things like that. It wasn't really presented like this is a full thing. You know,
Right.
like there were a few like, I don't know, Melancholy, The Infinite Sadness and stuff.
That's the only one I can honestly think of.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there were a number
Sure.
of them, but in the heyday of like 2 LPs coming out, you know, as a singular piece, you know, I kind of look at that more as a 70s sort of thing.
Sure.
So my choice is Mago Tago by Can, and it came out in 1971. I love this record, even if I can't pronounce the name of it. It has all of the stuff that I enjoy about Can from this point on, and it's already like almost fully realized, and that is pretty crazy. I think the big elements of this is the first record with their singer Damo Suzuki, and it changed a lot of things that he joined the band. Their other singer, Malcolm Moody, I think his name was, very cool voice, almost like a real wispy Bon Scott or something, or like the singer from Dead Moon. I don't know, just really high and kind of bluesy. I would say the music was closer to maybe like Captain Beefheart or something, like funky, jazzy, blues-based rock. And not to insult that at all, like the song You Do Right is one of the coolest songs I know of. Like I love it, and I love that era of Can as well. But this record with Damo Suzuki, the vocals take on a whole new sort of like reason to be there, and a lot of times it's sort of to just add wildness to the moment. So yeah, then they went on to become more like improvisational jams and cut up and electronic avant-garde and stuff like that, but still keeping that sort of like funky element. Yeah, they have almost every song has really funky drums, and you know, for years and years I didn't actually care for syncopation, like that sort of funk kind of rhythm. But when it's used right, I think it's really great and important. This also has a lot of strange, bendy sort of guitars, no longer really like carrying the song or playing the chords necessarily of the song, more just like melodic leads throughout. Damo Suzuki's vocals are so cool. They go from like these little high-pitched voices that seem like really far away, like across the room and very timid. They turn into like sort of emotive shouting, you know? The bass is super solid and always doing something really cool and in the pocket, and it's in the face of all the other chaos that's happening, and it really provides a solid groove and a solid foundation for everything. Yeah, the songs are separated a little more by like slight lulls or long interlude changes between things. And even the way it's separated digitally, it almost feels like the songs switch in the middle of a track, which is weird but cool, because it's like that is how you should be listening to it, more like one piece, you know. But yeah, I don't know, the part of this record that really blows my mind is that it came out in 1971. This predates a lot of things that seem like they were contemporaries, but they really weren't. And that's not to say that this specifically influenced those people, right? But it did add to sort of the environment that the music was being created in, the lexicon of music. And so I don't think it was missed by a lot of people. I think a lot of things were taken from it, even if it was, by proxy through a different band or whatever. A lot of the stuff that's introduced on this record, you can hear it afterwards in stuff that you wouldn't think might have been influenced by it. Throbbing Gristle, Suicide, Kraftwerk, Talking Heads, Sonic Youth, Radiohead, Folk Implosion, like just all kinds of anything, even, I don't even know, like Beck, like all sorts of stuff that you wouldn't even think this would matter to. I can hear it in all those things. But yeah, especially the use of drum machine. There's a song called Peking O that uses the drum machine in what even today would be considered a pretty insane way. So yeah, the foundations of krautrock, the foundations of no wave, new wave, experimental, avant-garde, noise rock. I don't know. It's all there for me. And yeah, I think this is a really cool album. But yeah, I think it's really great and super enjoyable. What'd you think, Dan?
Yes. I enjoyed the hell out of this album, Eric. I'm just gonna get that right out of the way.
Mm-hmm.
I've known about Can for many, many years, and I already had an idea in my head about what Can sounded like.
Mm-hmm.
I've never actually listened to a full album from them, but I've heard some bits and pieces. But I feel like Can it's for me, it was a band that was easily, or so I thought, identifiable whenever I was like trying to think of like something to compare something to that was just really kind of weird or like had elements of krautrock. Because from my perspective, it seems like Can is kind of one of the main bands that comes up in the conversation of krautrock. And I don't know if that is so much the truth or reality as it is just my perception of Can. So this is the first time I've actually sat down and listened to a full Can record. Now, in my opinion, this was a great introduction, Eric, for me,
Cool.
because I want to go down this rabbit hole. I made a playlist of all the Can records. So
Nice.
I'm going to go through this. And it's such, in my opinion, it was such an engaging, interesting, challenging, but also, I think, a very fun listen.
Mm-hmm.
And some people may disagree with that. I definitely, what I was kind of shocked by is, and I think you kind of were right about one thing for sure, Eric, is that this laid the foundation of krautrock, or at least krautrock as I know it.
Mm-hmm.
But I was kind of shocked because a lot of this didn't really sound very krautrock to me, or like what I perceive krautrock to be, which could be a whole other conversation. Because I'm sure you're a lot more well-versed in that conversation than I am. And I agree with you. I can't believe this came out in 1971. I think this was insanely ahead of its time. I mean, I could see this as the blueprint for all of the groups that you mentioned, Eric, for sure. And a lot of other ones, which I'll get to here in a second. But it's very like percussion oriented, like you mentioned, the drums, the way that they incorporate all of the rhythms and everything is just insane. What I would say this is more than like, again, this my perception of krautrock. I would say that this is kind of like the blueprint for like modern day experimental indie rock, if that makes sense. There's kind of like a sort of loose feel to the performance that kind of feels almost like free jazz or something to me. Yet I struggle with actually trying to think of anything to compare it to, which I think is awesome. But at the same time, it also sounds very tight, very planned out and well studied as well. Like I think everybody in this group obviously knows their place when creating this music. And so there's a tightness, but then there's almost like a, I don't know, like if this makes any sense, and this might sound kind of ridiculous, but to me, this just sounded like some of the most like free music I've ever heard. Like, I mean, it just sounded like, I don't know, it sounded like they were just kind of going off and just having a good time playing this music.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure if that's what they were trying to convey or even if that's what was going on. But I gotta say, I just had a blast. To me, every single thing about this, about these compositions and songs and everything, it really just built up to like excitement for me. I just never, I don't know, like I didn't know what to expect. And then there's also moments where, I don't know, like the song Mushroom, like that's the one that really like, when I listen to this, I'm like, this was in 1971. Like, because, okay, now I'm going to get into some of the other bands on top of some of the ones you mentioned. Like you mentioned Talking Heads. I cannot imagine Talking Heads forming the band that they did and not being influenced by this. But then also like you could go even further than like say Folk Implosion, and you could, I mean, I could definitely hear how Flaming Lips would have loved Can, you know, King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard for sure, man. Animal Collective, Black Midi, even Tropical Fuckstorm.
Yeah.
But then also like, yeah, I think you mentioned Public Image Limited, Pill. Maybe you did, maybe you didn't.
I didn't, but yeah, absolutely.
But I could definitely hear that. Particularly the bass. Like you said, the bass almost like carries the songs or carries the performance in a weird sort of way. So in some ways, it's like the bass is almost like the I don't know, the center movement of the music, which also then reminds me of like a band like Fugazi, for instance, because a lot of what Fugazi does, though completely different than what Can did, was very bass centric. You know, and so like I wouldn't be surprised if Joe Lally from Fugazi probably listened to this band, you know. I hear some King Crimson. I even hear some Tool. Like I could imagine Justin Chancellor loving this band from Tool. And then also like the jazz element, the composition really reminded me of like when the first time I listened to like Bitches Brew from Miles Davis. Yeah, I really literally have nothing else to say about it other than the fact that I wrote down in my notes Tego Mago instead of Mago Tego.
Oh, yeah.
So I put them in the wrong order.
It's named after something to do with Aleister Crowley. Like that's the weird part of this album. Like you said, I think it comes off as fun, but in reality, the inspiration for this album is occultism. So interesting.
Now that really makes sense because it also sounds very otherworldly, quirky, but also at times it also sounds dark. And I would say just exciting. Like, I mean, I don't know. Maybe that's just my reaction, but like it's dark in a completely different way than the Today Is the Day record is dark.
For sure. Yeah.
I mean, like that's just psycho dark. This is it does sound like they're like at times it does sound like they're doing like some sort of ritual or something at times, you know, so
channeling something.
So that really makes sense actually, that this would be influenced in some way. And you learn that a lot of music was influenced by Aleister Crowley. So like Throbbing Gristle, you mentioned Throbbing
Mhm.
Gristle. Throbbing Gristle was totally into that stuff, like Genesis P. Orch, you know?
For sure. Yeah.
And yes, 100%. I hear this in Throbbing Gristle as well. But
Mhm.
this is fantastic, man. This is a holy grail, Eric. I mean, we really you really hit the nail on the head with this one, man.
Wow.
I've
Awesome.
said that how many times on this podcast, but you really have been pounding a lot of nails lately, and I'm proud of you for it.
Thanks.
Honestly, it blew my mind. Just the song Mushroom alone blew my mind that this came out when it did.
I would say the song Mushroom and Vitamin C, those two songs for me really represent what Can became and what is great about them. Also, the track Future Days off of the record Future Days is mind blowing. So I don't know. Mushrooms
I can't wait
up
to
there.
check it out.
So yeah,
I can't wait to check it out. And you know what? Listening to it, I'm like, this is the kind of music I wish that I could play.
Oh, well,
you know what I mean? Like,
I'm sure you could do some aspect of that.
Oh yeah,
I mean, you know, right?
No, or actually, okay, let me rephrase this. This is the kind of music that I wish I would have found musicians that wanted to play this kind of music with.
Right.
Sort of thing.
You do have a platform to reach out to musicians. So there you go. Anyone want to start a can band with Dan? Dan's Can Band.
I think we're going to call it Candor. Or Dandor.
Yeah, Dandor. I would just call it Dan's Can Band, but
Dan's Can Band. The Dan
you do what
Can
you want.
Band.
It's your band.
How about the Dan Can Band?
The Dan Can Band. Oh shit. Okay. So you ready for the local?
I am ready for the local.
I'm gonna ask you just one more time, and it's local.
It is.
Okay. So the local review for this episode is by Ben Driscoll. The record is called Prior Salvage, and it just came out the beginning of September, which I don't know. By the time you hear this, it might be October, so it might not seem that new, but it's still pretty new. And I do have to say, after I suggested that we talk about this, I realized that I had played bass on some of the songs. So I am not going to talk about the bass on a few of the songs. And I don't think I would actually talk about the bass all that much anyway. I would say the songs that I play on, the bass is totally proficient. And that's about as far as I'll take it. But yeah, so with Ben is awesome. Ben is one of my really good friends. We've played a lot of music together going back 20 years at this point. We played in a group called the Heart Attacks together, and I've had the honor of playing on a lot of his stuff recently. It's cool. All this stuff is recorded live, at least the stuff I was involved in, which is a really cool experience. And I think you can hear it on the record. Ben is one of my favorite songwriters and has been from the first time I heard him. And I think one of the things I really like about it is he's really good at being a wordsmith. His turns of phrase are amazing and they're clever, but it's not overly poetic. It's really pragmatic and really authentic. Actually, a lot of his songs feel like he's sort of just telling you about an experience he had, whether it be a very specific experience that happened in one evening or sort of analyzing a place you're at in life or whatever. But it's all very, like I said, authentic. It feels very much like he is living it. But unlike a lot of people that write that way, like I said, Ben really can put it together in a clever way and make you go, wow, that was a really cool lyric. And that sort of writing is a really nice contrast to the sort of like heady nonsense that I usually listen to. You know, like it's really refreshing to just have someone tell me about an experience, walk me through something that's happening. And I really appreciate that. I think the production on this is really cool and really interesting. I think Ben has been experimenting with different elements of production and sound and and recording. There's moments, yeah, like every sound on here I think is very thought through and thought about and placed within the makeup of the song itself. It serves the song. You know, I think Ben knows what he wants something to sound like, and he creates that sound. And what's really cool about that, though, is the songs themselves are really traditional rock and roll. Like, and that's not to say there's not other influences in there, but it's very much like I hear Bruce Springsteen, I hear the Rolling Stones, some things like that, or maybe some Rancid, but definitely more of a traditional rock and roll thing. And so the production kind of makes it so you don't feel like you're in those sort of traditional songs. Like there are moments where there's, you know, an overdriven guitar is like just a little too overdriven, or the vocals sound far away, or like through a radio or something like that. It keeps it really interesting. I don't know. It's just a great set of songs. From a great songwriter. I mean, I could talk about Ben all day. He's, like I said, one of my favorite songwriters, one of my favorite musicians to be around, to see, to hear, to play with. It's a great record, and so you all should listen to it. And that's kind of the end of the story. So yeah, what do you think, Dan?
Yeah, I like this a lot. This record to me, it reminded me a lot of, at least in the beginning, like the first 3 or 4 songs, reminded me a lot of like just old school country. I think that there was a huge element of that, particularly the first song. I think Ben's got a fantastic voice, always has. I remember the Heart Attacks CD from a long time ago, and always enjoyed his stuff. The songs here are just great, and it was a hell of a palate cleanser after listening to the 2 double albums. No shade at all to the double albums because they were great, but this was just it was awesome because I listened to this after I listened to the double albums, and it was just nice to sit back and, you know, listen to like just kind of like you mentioned, traditional songwriting, you know, and just let it kind of flow through me, you know? And also, this was considerably a lot shorter than those records. Yeah, there's a lot of great Americana sounds on here. I would think that if you're a fan of Sun Volt, The Replacements, early Hank Williams, and of course, like you mentioned, Bruce Springsteen, I would even say parts of it reminded me of like John Mellencamp or something like that. But also with a definitely a punk influence, a punk attitude. And I agree with you 100% about the production. I think that each song had kind of a unique production. And the thing that I really liked about it is it sounded almost like an AM station, like an AM radio station. I would kind of suspect, just listening to the production on here, that he was channeling a little bit of that sort of like punk DIY production, which I think that's kind of what AM country, and I don't know, AM country is kind of just a made up genre in my head. Because anytime you tune the radio to AM and there's a country song that comes on, it just sounds punkier, if that makes any sense. So it's not really a true genre, but yeah. So I hear definitely a little bit of like something like Rancid going on. I hear a little bit of like, I don't know, Gaslight Anthem, Chuck Reagan, even that record that I picked a couple weeks back from Jim Lindberg, you know, stuff like that. So what I think this is it's a great combination of old school country, which I really, really like. A little bit of like, I don't really want to say folk punk, but I kind of think that's sort of what it is. Really, really good songwriting and just, I don't know, roots rock, because I definitely hear the traditional rock. One of the things about the production too, it almost sounded like if the Velvet Underground were a country group, how I would describe like the production anyway. Because it kind of had like that sort of reverby thing, which there's another country artist that on at least some of his stuff, I think channeled that. And that's Dwight Yoakam.
Oh, yeah.
So
Sure.
I kind of heard a little bit of Dwight Yoakam influence. I'm not sure how much that is an influence on Ben, but I heard that at least in the production, and I love that. It's kind of reverby, kind of sort of like a dusty production that just, I don't know, it sounds like listening to radio when it's not necessarily coming in like the greatest or the cleanest, but I think that's a great thing. Because I don't really like my country clean anyway,
Yeah.
So yeah, I think if you're into Sunvolt replacements, early Wilco, Dwight Yoakam, anything that Eric's played bass on,
Yeah. Right.
you'll love this.
There you go. Oh.
So
boy.
yeah,
Yeah.
I really enjoyed it a lot.
And also, I should mention that Brooke Strauss did the cover art for this, which is really a cool illustration. And
he did the cover to that.
Yeah.
I was going to say I really, really liked the cover because I had a very comic book feel to it.
yeah, exactly. Yep. Oh boy.
What all
Well,
did we
I think
learn
we
today?
did I think we did a double length podcast as well.
I think we did. Yes. This. Well, I mean, it's a special occasion. It's
Yeah,
81st.
Of course. I mean, that's a milestone everyone celebrates.
Everyone celebrates 81.
Yeah.
So we learned today that the 10 records, the 10 best records of 1981 are interesting.
Yeah. And some of them were the best.
Some of them were the best.
Yeah.
We learned that Erik plays bass sometimes.
Yeah.
We learned that Dan, what does Dan do? I mean, what do I do?
Well, you want to start a band. That
Okay,
sounds
I
like
want to start a
Dan's
band.
Can Band.
A can band. That's right. I want
Right.
to start a Dan can band.
Mm-hmm.
And then we also learned how to love.
Oh my God. All right.
I mean, not each other, but how to love. Like we
Yeah,
were just
I like
learning
it.
to love.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
all we're doing with this podcast. We're learning
Yeah.
to love each and every one of you listeners.
We'll get there.
Yes, we'll get there. And if you have any questions or concerns, please contact us on Facebook.
Yeah.
Did you know I'm back on Facebook now, Erik?
I saw a singular post. I didn't know if it was an indicator that you were back,
Well,
but
let me
that's
put it
cool.
to you this way. I'll be back for about a week. Then I'm
Yeah.
going to hijack out of there again.
Oh yeah. Well, there you go. Yeah.
Hightail, excuse me.
Hightail.
Hightail out of there again. I think that's going to be my approach with Facebook. I'm going to show
There you
up
go.
every once in a while just to
Yeah.
annoy people.
Well, if you only check it once every 2 weeks, it's kind of the same effect, right?
Right. Exactly.
so-
So
There you
I'm getting to where I'm wanting.
go.
I'm getting to where I'm wanting.
Which is what we all want
That's what we all want. We all want
to
to
get to
there.
where we want to get to where we want.
Yes. Well,
Okay.
Thank you for listening to our double album 81st Spectacular
Wow. Extravaganza.
Extravaganza.
Yeah.
And y'all be safe out there now, you hear?
Yeah. Have a fun time.
Have a fun time in the zone. The fun zone.
That was a great way to say goodbye. Oh my God. All right. You ready?
Have a good week, everyone. Bye.
Funky, jazzy, blues based rock